Brian, you are the interim CEO of Major League Pickleball, so can you explain the similarities and differences between the two and why that is a perfect complement to the tour that Connor runs?
Sure. So as Dave said, Connor and Dave represent the PPA. That's individual tours, very much like tennis. You would see Wimbledon, US Open, individual tournaments. On Major League Pickleball, that's team-based. Jesse plays for both. For our format, we actually have 24 teams. We've actually expanded from 12 in the past year, and each team is 4 players. I think there are 2 things that make MLP different from most other professional sports leagues. I think the first thing has to do with gender equity. Each team has 2 men and 2 women, and they play mixed doubles events, and they play men's and women's doubles events. If there is a need of a tiebreaker in a match, they actually play a singles match where it's often gender on gender, but it could also be cross-gender too, and it's incredibly exciting. We had our draft in Las Vegas a couple of months ago, and our first overall draft pick was actually a 16-year-old young woman who was actually 15 at the time. And it wasn't gimmicky at all. It actually is because she's the best female player in the world. And from an analytics perspective, she's that much better than the second best female, more than the best male is better than the next best male. And I believe there were, I think, 8 of the 12 first-round picks, including Jesse, were females. So that's one thing that's really pretty unique from a professional sports perspective. The other one is that our format is actually a promotion relegation format. We're actually the first American professional sport that actually has promotion relegation. And so we actually have 2 different tiers. So when we had the draft, the first 12 teams draft the top 48 players, and the next 12 teams play the next 48 players. And there's a promotion relegation format that's going to play out over the next few years. And why that's unique is, one of the issues, you'll find with other major professional sports in America, at least, because promotion relegation is quite popular in European football, is that we have an incentive problem in most professional sports, whereas everyone is trying to play for a championship. And once a team doesn't have a champion, they're not up to win the championship, there's almost an incentive to fail, right? Because you now want to be at the bottom of the order so that you're now going to be rewarded by having top draft picks. And on top of that, you're in a salary cap format. So that top amateur player in the draft next year that you may win the first pick for is not only a great talent who's going to contribute the first year, but from a salary cap perspective, they have tremendous relative value. So one of the problems you have in sports, and we're seeing this right now, particularly as you get to the NBA and the NHL trade deadlines, is that the leagues are becoming a barbell-like. The teams that are playing for the championship are going all in, and the teams that don't realize they can't win a championship are selling their current players for future draft picks. The Boston Bruins just yesterday, we're here in Boston, arguably the best team in hockey history this year, just traded for a 30-goal scorer yesterday and gave away another first-round draft pick because they want to win now. And other teams that, they're racing for the bottom. And from a fan perspective, that isn't really a great thing. And I'm sure, at this analytics conference, there's plenty of these types of conversations. Promotion relegation is about meritocracy, right? Every game matters, and that's really one of our themes. So the excitement from a fan perspective, it doesn't matter if your pickleball team isn't going to win the championship necessarily, but half the teams are going to be battling throughout the season to either stay up in the top level or to get promoted, right? So that adds a lot of drama to the suspense, and it's something that we're particularly excited for to see play out. I also think, like you said, it's a high-floor sport. So you actually see a lot of cross-age and cross-gender competition because people are good. You could see 70-year-old grandparents playing a competitive match with their 10-year-old grandkids, and they're trash talking, right? There's not a lot of activities where people are having fun and competing at the same time. I also think that it's incredibly, culturally, it's a very positive sport. And I do believe, and this, might sound cliche, but it really is about inclusion. I started playing right after COVID started as well down in South Florida, and I got addicted to it, and I would just go down every day to the community park, and you put down your paddle, and next up, you just play, and no one asks questions. This isn't something that ever would happen in tennis. And you just play with people, and you're playing with random people. And when I started playing, there were, senior citizens beating me up pretty badly, but you'd have fun. And, I also remember one of the first times I played, I remember being paired against a doubles team. This is in the heart of the 2020 election cycle, and there was a man wearing a Vote for Biden shirt, and his partner was wearing a MAGA hat. And they were high-fiving, they were celebrating. Obviously, no talks of politics, and I think that's honestly part of the pickleball culture that people feel, and it's something that society really needs right now, too.
Bring the nation together.
Yep.
Look at us. All right.
And I think it's also worth noting, it may sound like we're competing leagues. We're actually partners between the PPA and the MLP. In fact, Connor is an owner of the Utah Black Diamonds, and Dave is a general manager.
Let's talk about the business side here for a minute, Brian. The Major League Pickleball got a lot of attention last year from the celebrity and sports owners coming in. I mean, you had LeBron James as an owner. Tom Brady is an owner. Naomi Osaka is an owner. Mark Cuban is in there. What enabled that incredible A-list to become a part of this growing sport, and how do you see that evolving going forward?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a great work by our team to get some of them involved, and partly just because of the pickleball craze, people want to be associated with it, and it just becomes one of those things that just goes and goes. From a league perspective, from a business perspective, it's actually fascinating for us because, you know, as important as traditional media is for us to get our brand out there, and I'll take a step back and say, you know, our primary goal is to convert players into fans of the professional game. Like, that's our core for all of us, because there were 37 million Americans that played pickleball last year, and it's grown from virtually nothing. And most of those aren't that familiar with the professional game, right? And I think naturally you would assume that that's going to lag to some degree. So we have to get exposure. We have to, you know, people have to see the best players in the world playing, as you also will see Jesse and others playing later today. And, you know, traditional media has some limitations how you can get that out there. However, you know, with the influencer aspect, it's much more significant. So just to give you an example, in our last event, we played, our finals were on the Tennis Channel. We had about 600,000 viewers, which was very nice. But the winning team was the LA Mad Drops, which is owned partially by NFL legend Drew Brees. And Drew was there, right there on the court, wearing his Mad Drops jerseys. And, you know, also a little bit different is, you know, before the matches, he was playing casually with Larry Fitzgerald, also an NFL legend and owner of the Arizona Drive. And, you know, they're having a blast like everyone else does with pickleball. And, you know, he's posting, you know, stories and whatnot to his social media accounts, and he's got millions of followers. They won the finals. They beat LeBron's team, the New York Hustlers. And LeBron posted to his 147 million Instagram followers, right? So again, 600,000 Tennis Channel followers is nice, but 250 times that crowd getting exposure to our game, you know, not only is it a significant number, but it expands the reach, right? Because the 600,000 people that watch the Tennis Channel have a proclivity to watch pickleball and tennis, right? Whereas we're introducing this game to just really the world, and it's happening incredibly quickly.
So Brian, we're at a data conference. Pickleball getting started. You know, we're not going to misrepresent ourselves here, but where do you see data within this great sport going? And how can those in this audience who do this for a living potentially get involved in our fast-growing sport?
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's obviously we're a year or two in, so we're not too advanced in terms of analytics. I would say one of the positives is that to measure player performance, you really can simplify it into just points scored, points against. It kind of funnels all into there, as opposed to something like baseball where you could say how good is a player. Well, you know, there's offense, there's defense, and even within offense, you know, there's power, there's contact, that they get on base. You could distill this down into just points scored, points against, and the sample set's actually, I'll talk numbers because people here like numbers, is pretty high. So in a typical match, a player has 100 or so rallies in a match, and if a player does well in a tournament, they could play over half a dozen matches in a day. So they can get in 1,000 rallies in a day. So you've got a pretty good sample set to see how good they're doing, points scored, points against. Part of MLP, there's a rating system called Duper, where you can measure how strong, what your rating system is. It's a handicap similar to gin and golf. And it's an algorithm that looks at the quality of your partner and the quality of your opponents. And it measures by point differential. So it's not just as simple as I won 11-0. It matters whether you won 11-9 or 11-4, and your rating will adjust accordingly. So that point differential is pretty significant. In terms of, you know, the micro stats, There are some things that people are looking at. There are things like winners and unforced errors and maybe assists and saves. And there's a lot of chatter about that. I do think, like with many other sports, we're going to need things like Hawkeye, like you have in baseball and in tennis, to really measure the exact contact point relative to the height and relative to the net, because truly it is gray to say what's a winner versus an unforced error, right? What looks like a winner could just be because your opponent floated a drop a little too high, and it's very high hard with the naked eye to see. Yes. But once you can start looking at things, and plus, exit velocity and spin rate and things like that, I think we can get much more advanced. But that's coming, like everything else in pickleball, is coming extremely quickly.
Brian, anything to add? I know inclusivity is a big part of the the tenets of Major League Pickleball.
Yeah, no, I mentioned a lot of it before. The one other thing I would add is I have this vision over the next few years where, even amateur tournaments, you're going to see cross-gender and cross-age, because, you've got these ratings where, they're agnostic to that. And, I think about, in my club, the pro at my club is a female who's much younger than me, and she's a borderline pro, and I would never play against her in a tournament because, female and it's a different age bracket. It gets broken by age brackets similar to other sports. But the reality is, we're incredibly close. We've got great matches all the time, and we should be playing each other. And, there are some amateur formats now where we're starting to do that, and it's a perfect example of inclusivity. There's no reason why a doubles match can't have, 3 women and a man or vice versa. And, I think pickleball is going to go there too, more quickly than not, just because that's kind of part of our culture. And I would just add one quick thing, on that topic of, how do you convert casual players into fans? Why are they going to want to watch the pro game? And the thing I always hearken back to is, you want to watch the best people in the world perform the sport. And I think very much about golf, right? Golf obviously has a pretty strong professional viewership audience, right? Almost all of those people are addicted golfers, right? And even though the gameplay is relatively slow, compared to something like pickleball, I'll throw another stat at you, from the time a match starts to when it finishes, the ball is in play for over 40% of the time, right? And that's, for tennis, it's 16%, baseball, it's 4%. With their new rules, may go up to 4.5% this year. But the gameplay is exciting. But why do people watch golf? They're addicted golfers. They want to watch the best in the world perfect the craft, right? They want to watch Rory McIlroy, hit a 7-iron 225 yards, with a draw over the water, right? And say, wow, I wish I could do that. And that's what it's like when you watch people like Jesse. And then someone like me, I watch that and I say, they hit shots where I'm like, I wish I could have done that, or why did they do that? And that's going to draw people in. And so I'm obviously, we're all pretty convicted that this is going to take off from a spectator perspective. I love the analog of the kitchen as the chess match because, and I can speak from an analytics perspective, one of the reasons why I think points are so exciting in pickleball is because leverage changes so often in the course of a point because of that kitchen. So, a lot of people measure the excitement of, say, a football game by seeing how much the win probabilities change throughout the course of a game, right? A team will have a 90% chance of winning. They're up by 14 points early in the fourth quarter. It comes back, and how much that curve, how much that changes, is how exciting the game is. A point is like that too, and I'd say if you compare it to tennis, when you get to a point in a tennis match where you've got very low leverage, meaning your opponent's at the net, you've got to hit a shot that's kind of off the court, you kind of have to end the point right there, right? Because you're done. You're either going to have to hit a winner, maybe hit a lob, but that's probably going to be the last shot that's hit in that point. Because of that kitchen, it gives you a bailout that has a higher probability. And it almost is immediate, meaning in that same situation in pickleball, rather than trying to hit a winner straight away, if you can drop that ball right into the kitchen, and you can get yourself up, you're leaving the ball at your opponent's feet. There's very little they can do with that. So suddenly that leverage changes. Whereas just a second ago, you had a 10% chance of winning that point. You're actually, if you hit a great drop shot, you're over 50%. And if they pop a ball up, now they're backtracking. And so you'll have points where one team is the aggressor, they're slamming it, the other team's just getting it back, they just get one back right into the kitchen, and all of a sudden it's reversed, right? And you've got a lot of points where you've got that massive leverage change, and that's what makes points exciting.
You, Brian, what can you learn from other leagues that maybe it's a mistake they made or something they did well, or what have you learned that you can incorporate into what Major League Pickleball is doing?
Yeah, there was an interesting panel yesterday talking about, I think it was for Athletes Unlimited and a couple of the other, I think Premier Lacrosse. We're also a centralized league, right? The difference is we do have owners, right? We've got 24 teams. But the owners own a piece of equity in the centralized league. So as opposed to most major professional sports, the teams, are not predicated on their bottom line. It's based on the league. Now they've got abilities to make money through sponsorships locally and merch and things like that. But for the most part, we're centralized. So that gives us an ability to be a little more nimble. And I think you need to be nimble because things are changing on a weekly basis, in terms of what our environment is. And there are, plenty of expansion opportunities, whether it's, calls to do MLP International. We're doing college championships through Duper. We're doing different types of amateur tournaments. There's all different types of things that we can do. And I think the fact that we're centrally, obviously we do still have, 24 owners, and some of the ownership groups are fairly large. But I think as opposed to most traditional sports leagues, it just allows us to be much more flexible in terms of strategy. As I said before, like the culture that exists at the amateur game, I think it exists at the pro game too. I mean, I think I'm curious here, like what Jesse's thoughts would be in terms of going from tennis. Like I feel like the behavior of players is just it's so much more. It's friendly. It's more social.
It is, absolutely.
Whereas I think in tennis it could be much more alienating. And I think sometimes people come from tennis and they may be a little tight on line calls and things like that. And there's like a culture like we don't do that here. And
I think that comes from because in pickleball the events that are the most popular are your doubles and your mixed doubles. At a certain point, pickleball almost forces you to be nicer.
Right.
Because whereas in tennis the most, and it's true, where in tennis the most popular event is singles, it's just you. And it's a very selfish thing, and honestly, to be successful in tennis, you have to be selfish. Right. Whereas in pickleball, the most popular events are doubles and mixed, so there's a partner involved. And what ends up happening is you overall are nicer to everyone else that's on the tour because there's a good chance you're going to want to play with them down the road.
Right. And I think the close quarters too.
Yes.
You could fit 4 pickleball courts in one tennis court, and I think being close quarters, and one of the reasons why it's social from an amateur perspective, I think from a professional perspective, like you're talking to people like this, all game long. So it's a lot harder.
I think the other thing that helps is a lot of us again are not young. We're a little bit more mature. We're adults.
Some more young than others.
Some more than others, but we are adults at the end of the day. And for a lot of us, this is a second chance. And we all kind of are very grateful for that. So I think we appreciate the moments of being able to be a professional player. Right. So we just behave a little bit better, and we enjoy it. We're all there having a good time because we realize, hey, this is just a second opportunity for me. I never would have had this without pickleball, so I'm just going to embrace and enjoy this moment instead of taking it so seriously. Like when I step on the court, I'm competitive and I'm intense and I'm focused, but once I step off, I realize I'm just so happy to be here.
And you feel that. I mean, it is the culture, and I don't want to sound like I'm overselling these events, but the truth is the positivity. When you're around people that are all positive and happy to be there, it's like everyone has that same thing. It's not like sitting at a New York Jets game. Where I feel like half the fans wearing Jets fans are yelling at their players the whole time. Like this is, there is a positivity that is at the pro level that's not much different from the amateur level and than what people experience playing at their local parks.
To just sort of wrap this up, I hope you feel the passion oozing out of all of us for this sport, and we want partners that want to become a part of growing it, and we want to build this community that it is. I started with pickleball derangement syndrome, and I will end with that. We all have it. We are obsessed with what we have, and it's a privilege for all of us to have a sport that a lot of people have turned it into one of the things they can't live without, and that's a true blessing for all of us.
It's a sport for the people.
It is. It is indeed. So thank you so much for spending part of your time with us. I appreciate it.
Good job, Dave.